All right, so getting started on the 64 build today. What we're gonna do is we're gonna try and take off the front clip just to have better access to everything, better access to the firewall because we will be doing some work on the firewall. What we're gonna do first is take the tarp off now that I have the tie strap removed, and we'll pull that back and see what we're looking at. All right, we have the car cover pulled back. We'll need access to the doors because we got to get some bolts out from behind the door and fender. So we'll pop the hood and see what we're looking at. I'm gonna take a note as best as I can on how many spacers and everything go in each location. This one has 2 right behind it, so when I take the fender off, I'll leave those 2 and put the bolt through there. This one has none, for example. So I'm gonna do that across the whole thing. I'm gonna start with draining the coolant and get the radiator out. I'll get the battery out, and then I'll disconnect. For the battery, it's just these 2 posts and a hold down. I'll disconnect the front harness, so anything connected to the body, like here where it's zip tied, and over here it's kind of bolted to the firewall. So basically what I want to do is free up everything from the front end. So I want to take it off the fenders together with the core support and the hood and everything still mounted, and that's kind of the goal today. All right, so we have the radiator draining. We've got the battery out. We are gonna probably weld up all this little rust damage, and then we're gonna work on getting this front wiring harness all out. So we'll unplug everything, we'll unbolt the grounds. We're gonna actually go ahead and unclip all the wiring that's clipped up under here. On this side, same thing, we're gonna unplug the headlights, undo the relay, like the horn and everything like that, horn relays, the horns, and then all these little push clips that are here under the fender. Okay. So we got the heater hose disconnected from the inner fender well. We got the battery and battery tray out. We undid the front harness over here, ran it back through across and under. We were able to pull everything out on this side. We left the horns in place. We didn't have to unbolt those. Also, we were able to just simply unplug the, I believe this is the horn relay or voltage regulator, I don't recall. But we were able to unplug this and just basically set everything up towards the center of the engine bay so that the fenders and everything could be pulled off. I think what we're gonna do, I'm gonna look at it, we are either gonna take that inner fender well off now while we have ground clearance, or we might leave it bolted on for more sturdiness and just unbolt the inner fender well at the firewall and then take it off with the front end. So I'm gonna look into that right now. All right, so this inner fender well actually is different than the 69. The 69 has a couple bolts that bolt the inner fender well to the firewall. This doesn't have that on the 64, so it's just 5 around the inner fender. There's 2 that hold it to the fender, and then there's also a couple kind of under the battery tray area. So we did have to unplug the front turn signal here, but basically we're gonna just leave that attached for now. Those bolts do look a little bit rusted, and what I'd like to do is have the whole front end off and have better access to them without taking the wheel off now. So we'll save time now. We might have to cut some of those off and stuff like that, so I don't really want to get into that and spend all this nice daylight doing that today. So we're going to keep moving forward and leave that attached. I actually am wanting to pull this radiator just to get a little bit more clearance in the engine bay and make sure that we drain all the fluid out of it. All right, so right now we've got the radiator unbolted. There's just 2 screws on each side. With, you know, these actually are pretty brittle after some time. You could see that one of the nuts on the other end snapped off, so we'll get some new ones anyways, probably some new bolts later. But we've got the radiator unbolted. I've gone ahead and started taking the hoses off, so I used a 5/16 there. These were 1/2 inch on the radiator. I used a 5/16 on that one and on the hose at the water pump. The reason I'm disconnecting it from the engine and not the radiator side is I'd actually like to keep these hoses and not sell it with the engine. Part of the reason is I think these might actually work and bolt directly onto the LS engine. So I'm gonna hold on to those for now just to see. It looks like it should work, and we'll see what happens. All right, quick update. One thing I thought I could get away with is leaving the fan shroud attached, but that clearly isn't gonna work. The fan shroud actually won't slip by the fan, so I'm gonna go ahead and unbolt the 4 nuts and bolts on that and just let the fan shroud sit back on the mechanical fan so I could slide out the radiator. All right, so in hindsight, what I'm gonna recommend is that you disconnect the fan shroud first and slip that back over the mechanical fan. The reason you wanna do that first is because if you try to do it like I did and take the radiator first, then realize you have to remove the shroud, the radiator actually drops while you're trying to remove some of these bolts. So it'd probably just be better if the radiator stayed in place while you remove the shroud. All right, so I got the radiator out. Came out pretty easily. Once I got it out, I dumped the rest of the radiator sideways into the drain bowl. My dog's barking. I just had to make sure he's not gonna go chase somebody down. Basically I got it all out. One thing I'll notice is I do put all the bolts back in the place I pulled them out, just so I know, and anything that I can, I try to take a picture to document so I know how it went back together. The other thing that's important is keeping bolts, even if they're junk, just so it's easy to measure them and see, you know, what you need when you're replacing them later. Another part of the reason why I put the bolts back instead of the bagging and labeling as much as possible is because I do have a wife who's trying to be environmentally conscious and friendly all the time, and wasting Ziploc bags isn't necessarily something she enjoys. So, you know, pick your battles. I get to work on cars and pollute the air, but I do have to avoid using Ziploc bags. So that's gonna wrap that up. So next we're gonna go ahead and unbolt the front clip now. I don't have anybody here because of this damn quarantine to help me lift it off. So maybe my wife will on her lunch, or maybe I'll figure it out. But we're gonna go ahead and start unbolting the front end. There's gonna be a bolt right here. I'm gonna undo all the bolts except for this top one first, or even this inside one. The reason is I want the front end to stay in place as long as possible. So you do have one here. I believe these are all 9/16. One here, one on top with 2 spacers behind it. You have the one inside up here, and then there's gonna be 2 down here. It looks like I'm missing one because that's where the inner fender mounted, I think. And then you have the other one here. What I'm also gonna do is have to remove these chrome trim pieces on the side. They look to be just little bolts all the way down. So I'm gonna remove those as well so that I don't damage them taking the front fenders off. Just a quick note on this side, the shim fell out when I took the bolt off. So it goes bolt, fender, shim, and then the firewall cowl. So this was in there. All right, so there's 6 screws. They're 1/4-inch heads. Take the 6 screws off the bottom. They're underneath this rocker. And then basically the chrome, you'll pull it away and lift it up and away. So you kind of pull it back and then lift it up pretty hard. It will come out from behind this. Now we will have to take this front one off too, because it does connect the front fender and the rocker here. So basically we're disconnecting at this seam. We need to make sure this one's off. So I'll go ahead and take that one off too. All right, I just want to make a note here. We're on the passenger side, and this side actually, it looks like it has 2 shims. We'll see when it all comes out, but it looks like there's a smaller one and then a thicker shim behind where I took that bolt out. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move forward on the front bolts at the firewall, upper and lower. We've got the bolts out behind the doors on both sides. We've got the chrome trim off and the chrome trim, I don't know what you call them, holders off. So now that that's all removed, let's move forward. And that will start our parts shelf. So now we've got a parts shelf going for the 64. All right, I'm gonna make a note here. There is a spacer. It's kind of hard to see. It's right underneath the fender there, between the fender and the cowl. And then on this side, there's actually 2 of them. So we're gonna try and make sure we get those back in their right places. 2 on the driver's side, 2 on the driver's side in there, 1 on the passenger side. We did actually snap off the rusted bolt on the lower fender on this side, and then on the other side, the bolt didn't snap off, but the I think the washer nut or the clip with the nut on it on the inside is just spinning. So we'll have to figure that one out too. Sorry for the video quality there. Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead before we do the final 2 bolts on the firewall. We're actually gonna unbolt the core support from underneath the frame rails. Well, we got pretty lucky that this came out without breaking. These are kind of interesting, and we're probably gonna replace these, but this flat rectangle is supposed to just hold it in place there, kind of locks it in place from turning. I'm just gonna end up going with some grade 8 bolts and nuts, just good old classic way. You can see that this was even starting to twist in there. So we'll get the other side off, but that'll be the core support. And again, moving to the firewall after. All right, we got all the bolts out. And with all the bolts out now, this side is still holding us up. Trying as best as I can not to damage the fender. So what I did go through the body a little bit right here, the fender. But basically I cut through the washer and broke the washer off around. Now I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of the way through this bolt and maybe stick the same screwdriver in here and twist it, try and basically grind off or use a chisel and break off the head of this bolt. Once I get the fender off, I could do all the repair and clean up and new bolts and everything on the inside. It's just a matter of getting that bolt off. All right, so I've basically cut a cross in the bolt and then I chiseled off 2 of the corners to thin it out. I could keep going and chisel it away, but I think I could actually punch this through now. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and free up this fender. Sitting here thinking about how I'm gonna edit this video together, and excuse the dog toys. And I'm just pissed off that I didn't set the camera up on the stand, because the video footage of removing that front clip is just so cool. But it's all right. I'll show you guys how to do it when I put it back on, and I'll just describe how I did it in the video. All right, we got the front clip off with the help of my neighbor over there. We ended up having to drop the bumper. So there's 2 bolts on, there's one on this side, one on the other side. You pull those out and you could just kind of stomp the bumper down. The reason you do that is so the filler panel doesn't get stuck under here. So we have the bumper drop down, and then the fenders do get caught up a little bit on this lip, so you kind of have to pull them out. You just don't want to do it too much. And then on this side, keeping the fender well in, the inner fender well started to kind of get hung up here, so you just had to lift this side higher and pull it out a bit harder on this end, but it was able to come out. So I did find 3 spacers down here. It looks like 4. So my guess is that there was 2 of them must have been up here, and there was probably 2 underneath here that we couldn't see. So we have those spacers, or shims, and then there was 2 up on top of the fender here. So there's 2 spacers under here, none on the firewall, 2 underneath the bolt on the bottom of the fender, and then I believe these 2 in the door, there. And then on the other side, there was 2 on top of the fender as well. This one's from behind the door, and then a few on the ground. So there might have been actually 2 behind the door. I couldn't see, maybe one fell. I think one did, and then these 2 might have been underneath here. So we have some spacers. I could see on both sides, actually, I have door hinge pieces and springs falling off, which makes sense why it doesn't stay open. So I might upgrade door hinges. At least I know that's a thing I need to do now. Other than that, yeah, now we have complete access to the engine. Should be making things a lot easier for us to pull that out. So we're gonna go ahead and kind of make a game plan. and then take it from there. Alright, so since I didn't take a cool video of us pulling the front clip off, I'm gonna let you guys watch me struggle dragging it to the backyard a little bit, since my neighbor's not outside and my wife's working. So let's see if I can do it. Thanks for watching me struggle through that. Thanks for also not lending a hand. But you guys stay safe through this COVID quarantine. Stay tuned for some more updates. Like and subscribe.